Hi folks, I'm Matt and welcome to My Expanded Universe, a show where I go through the entire Expanded Universe material in chronological order as best I know how. Folks, we're going to start off with Knights of the Old Republic, a very exciting era within the Star Wars universe. Now, before you begin, there's one short story that I want you to read. I haven't seen it in a timeline yet. It's a hyperspace story called The Journal of Dr. Demagol, and it's written by, let's see, Antos Warwick. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but it's a short story about a Mandalorian scientist, an evil scientist, and basically just what he's working on, what projects he's experimenting on. Now, after that, you go into John Jackson Miller's Knights of the Old Republic comic book series. Taking place a little less than 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, it focuses on Padawan Zane Carrick and con artist Griff, and a few other friends, as Zane stars as a Padawan who was betrayed and framed by his Jedi masters, who murdered all the Padawans and left him holding the bag as blame. So Zane is a Jedi fugitive, and he's on the run and trying to redeem his name. This is a fantastic story. I love the characters. It's very character driven. Zane character is fun to read. He's a goof. He's a screw up. He's not even a powerful Jedi, and I love that about him. But only read the first 12 issues, because after that you got to take a break and you got to read Labor Pains, another short hyperspace fiction written by John Jackson Miller. Now, where can you go to find all of this hyperspace fiction? There's an easy website, and I'll show you where it is. It's savudu.com. That's SUVUDU.com. They have most of the hyperspace fiction that was posted on StarWars.com back in the old days on their website. So you can go there and find any of these short stories that I'm talking about. Now, after you read that short story, dive back into the comic books, starting with issue 13 and going through issue 24. And basically this is just showing more of the same story. By the way, speaking about the comic books again, I love the art. I think it's pretty good. And again, characters like Camper and others, I really did enjoy. It's very character driven. John Jackson Miller did a good job describing characters that we take an interest in and we take a liking to and that we actually care about. And the stories are fun, and there is some humor there, which really does the series well. It doesn't feel that long. It went 50 issues total, but didn't feel that long while reading it. Now, the next short hyperspace fiction you need to read, stopping at issue 24, would be Interference. This is a fantastic story. It's a short story about a guy who's on the holonet. He's kind of like has his own radio broadcast, and he's taunting the Mandalorians. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything for you because I'm trying to keep these reviews spoiler free, but that hyperspace short is definitely worth your time. I found it hilarious. But anyway, once you finish that hyperspace short, dive back into the comic books and issues 25 through 28, 4-issue crossover series called Vector. Now, it was the brainchild of John Ostrander and John Jackson Miller to basically do a crossover within all the Star Wars books out at the time. Now, each Vector story is self-contained, meaning you can just read the Vector story in Knights of the Old Republic and be fine. You don't have to read the rest of them. If you want to, the rest of them went from Dark Times to Rebellion to Legacy. Now, they have 2 trade paperbacks that collect all the Vector books. At this point, the question must be asked, should I go ahead and read all of Vector? You can if you want to. I did when it came out and I thought it was fine. Do you have to read it? I would say no. I think each story is self-contained enough to where you can just move on. And wouldn't it be cool if you are reading this in chronological order, that years later when you come across it in Dark Times and then Rebellion, go, oh yeah, I remember this. And then a few more years later when you come across it in Legacy, you're like, oh, there it is again. But, you know, either way you want to do it is fine. You're not missing anything. The main character, Celeste Morn, in that Vector storyline is not very memorable. I mean, you can read the whole storyline. I thought it was fine because I liked the idea of having a cross. They say it's not a crossover. I think John Jackson Miller referred to it as a cross through because it goes through all 4 books. But I actually really liked the idea. The storyline was okay, but the idea was a little bit more genuine. Now after that, of course, you want to keep diving into those comic books from issues 29 to 35. And in this story, it basically ties up the main storyline where Zane finally confronts the Jedi Masters who framed him. And I was kind of shocked to see it end so soon in issue 35 because I thought this was something they'd drag out to issue 50, and I'm kind of glad they kind of ended the story early because it freed up more storyline. Now, once you get to issue 35, the reason I tell you to stop is now you have to go back to Lost Tribe of the Sith, and you have to read the book Purgatory, the short story. It takes place 1,000 years after Savior, still talking about the Sith on that planet and where they crashed and what's going on with them there. Again, this is if you're reading in chronological order. That's where you want to stop and read Purgatory. After that, go back to the comic books, jump back in it at issue 36 to 50 and read the rest of the adventure. They tie up a bunch of the side storylines in these. Now, while you're looking at these comic book covers, a few things I want to say about the series. I thought overall it was a pretty good read. It was very character driven, and that's all credit to John Jackson Miller. It was one of the better books that were coming out in the later days of Dark Horse, in my opinion. I thought they were all good. One thing I didn't like about the series is that it ended the same way that every daggum Dark Horse series was ending at the time, with its own 5-issue miniseries called War. And we have to call it War because it's a war with the Mandalorians. Now, the story overall is okay. I think it takes place 14 years after the very first Knights of the Old Republic, so Zane Garrick is a lot older now. He's been drafted by the Jedi to fight in the war, and it wasn't a bad story. I just don't like the subtitle War as everything. Remember in Jedi Dawn of the Jedi, their final miniseries is called Force War. And in the comic book series Legacy later on, they wrapped it up in a miniseries called War. Everything's got to be war. Come up with something a little bit more original than war. That just doesn't make sense to me. But overall, the comic books were pretty good. Now, once you finish the comic books by John Jackson Miller, a smart thing to do is go back to Lost Tribe of the Sith again, and this time you're going to read the short story Sentinel. Sentinel takes place roughly a year or a couple months after Purgatory. So that's where we're going to stop for right there. Now, to be honest, how does this whole Knights of the Old Republic era go with John Jackson Miller? Pretty good. Timothy Zahn always gave advice to writers, said, find your own sandbox in the universe and play within that sandbox, meaning find your own edge of the galaxy that no one's touched and build your own characters, build your own world, build your own stories. John Jackson Miller really took that to heart, and he built a lot of stories in the Old Republic. That was most of the stuff he worked within. So this is his kind of world here. He had it going down. He knew what was going on. Later on, he would write Knight Errant and do a comic book series on that as well. So for what he did in this era, it was actually very good. I was kind of pleased by it. He found his own little sandbox, an era that he liked that wasn't explored, and he gave it character. And I'm really thankful for the characters that he gave us. Now before we go, as you see, Yub Nub's reading another book. It's called Size Matters Not by Warwick Davis. He's, all excited because it's about an Ewok and about the tales of being an Ewok in Return of the Jedi. And what? You thought it was a book about Dave Filoni? Why would you think? Oh, Yub Nub, you guy, you.